Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you're an incredibly busy man at the moment, given the news that broke over the weekend. Can you sort of start by giving us the latest hot update on what's been happening with Hayes in the US women's national team?
Yeah, I think we're waiting for the official confirmation, right? And that's just coming. I think, working through some of those final details. I'm not sure, I don't know if U.S. Soccer was necessarily ready for the news to break when it did, but I think when you look at, Chelsea's announcement that was pretty specific that she's leaving the club, leaving for outside club opportunities in the WSL, that obviously pushed things quite a bit quicker. So yeah, we're waiting for the official word. It is happening though, and I think it's an exciting time for the U.S. women's national team. I think there's a lot of optimism around this hire.
Last week we discussed 3 front runners for the role, none of which were Emma Hayes. So how long has this been in the offing?
Yeah, I mean, look, she's been the top choice for a bit now. I think that U.S. Soccer and probably Emma and Chelsea were probably quite happy that didn't get out. But, she was the top candidate for a while now. And, I think that there's obvious reasons why, right? I mean, look what she's done with Chelsea. She's great tactically. She's a great people manager. I think, I've heard this. I believe this. I've heard it from a lot of other people. I think best available hire. And, U.S. Soccer went out and got her, which I think is credit to sporting director Matt Crocker. I think there was skepticism about the process and what it might yield, who it might yield, and how it would look. But, she's best available candidate. And they went out and they made it worth her while, right? I think everything I've been told is this is a 7-figure annual salary. It could be comparable, if not the same, as the men's coach, which is new ground. I mean, very new ground compared to what it used to be for the pay for the women's national team coach. So, yeah, she's been the target just quietly.
And what's the reaction been like in the US? I think because I think over here we're in mourning. It's a national day of mourning. Yeah, we're all really upset. We were all incredibly shocked, incredibly saddened, but also appreciate this is a role that it feels like a different step, a different challenge for her. But yeah, what are the US thinking? Yeah, is it kind of like a big celebration over there? There are banners and flags and,
Maybe when she arrives in person. But I think, the fact that there's this mourning feeling in England and at Chelsea specifically, I'm sure, is, I think indicates how good of a hire it is for U.S. Soccer, right? That there's so much feeling around. I mean, obviously, what she built at Chelsea, that's very personal in a way. I mean, she's deeply connected to the rise of that team. So, yeah, but I think over here, I mean, like I said, I think it's optimism, and that is there's a lot of pessimism over here. I mean, maybe that is relatable to England as well in some ways, and coaching hires and just where the team is at. But there's a lot of work to be done. It was a horrible World Cup for the U.S. A lot of questions that begged about what the future looks like for the program, for the player pool, and that really led to a lot of questions about who was going to come in, who would be the right fit to manage all that short and long term. And obviously we'll see what happens. There was optimism around Vlatko Nonovsky being hired. Obviously didn't pan out as a 2023 World Cup ultimately 4 years later. But, I think that people are excited about this overall. And that's new. That hasn't been felt in a while, certainly from a U.S. fan perspective, men's and women's.
Obviously, we know what Emma Hayes has done here, her accolades over here, what she's won over here. But she does, of course, have history in the US, probably most notably her time at Chicago Red Stars. She was then technical director at Western New York Flash. Do you think that played a part at all, kind of knowing what the setup and how important sport is and how you guys kind of that culture around sport is in the US? Do you think that played a part?
Well, I think her U.S. experience, I mean, she's always talked about the U.S., and I think you can look at that Chicago Red Stars stint, 2009, 2010, probably, I think she'd say that she might have said it already, that's her greatest failure. But that also shaped her, right? I mean, that was within 2 years, she becomes head coach of Chelsea from there. And so I think that you look at, I mean, she basically got her coaching start in the U.S. at a very low level with an amateur team. Iona is a small college not far from me. It's not a huge college that she started coaching there, but then make that jump to the Chicago Red Stars doesn't go well. New league. So I think that she learned a lot in the U.S. She's always stayed tied to it. She's been over here for even on a media side working with ESPN, and she knows the player pool. I think she's that right mix of she knows the American mentality. She knows the American player pool, including its weaknesses. She's talked about that. then she comes enough removed and from the outside that she can, then try to put her stamp on it. And this becomes the question is, how much leeway does she have? How much support does she have? Because you hire Emma Hayes because she's a great coach, and also because she's the person to come in and say, this is everything that's wrong, and this is what I'm going to do about it. Now, when she says that, what is the reply? That, what is the backing? That's going to be the question for U.S. Soccer. And this hire suggests that they're ready to say, yes, go do this. We trust you. But that has to actually happen now.
I think, you picked on a couple of points there and sort of saying, the situation the US women's national team is in it's been a turbulent few years for the squad. Amalgamating in the fact that, didn't have a great showing at the World Cup this year, expected to obviously do better. Gone from a period of transition, bringing in a lot of younger players coming in, and obviously overseeing a period of some of the older players retiring, some of the big greats. Do we think, how challenging do you think the job is going to be? What kind of situation, I suppose, is Emma Hayes walking into, and what's the kind of expectation there for her to sort of turn things around?
Well, look, highest expectations in the world still, right? Whether that's, American arrogance or not, the bar is go win a World Cup. And, frankly, it's going to potentially be go win a World Cup on home soil in 2027, right? I think you could subjectively, I guess, at the moment, because we don't know how it'll play out, we're still waiting for a host, right? But they seem like a favorite, at least commercially, for everything FIFA wants to do. So, a home World Cup for a team that will have players who, are on the younger side, probably just went through a pretty poor World Cup in 2023. The pressure there is going to be immense. We talk about 99 a lot in this country. I think the pressure there might be even greater with the media attention that exists now that didn't back then. So I think huge pressure that she's walking into. I don't think she'll be scared of that. I think, Emma, and she wouldn't have taken this job if she were. Nobody would take this job if they were, right? But this is, I think, it'll be interesting to see, because Emma is somebody that is largely celebrated because she's such a good coach. Now, what happens when those blips in the road come? Because they're going to come. And the hope is, if you're a U.S. fan or if you're a U.S. player or coach, that they come in 2025 in a patch of friendlies and not in 2027, right? But I think that's going to be the big thing. But she's got a challenge on her hands. That's the long term. And even the short term is juggling both jobs until May. While, what does that look like? We still don't know exactly. And probably within that time frame has some really tough decisions to make on a personnel front for the Olympics. And, those are probably easier face-to-face, but we'll see how she has to manage those as well, even in the immediate future here.
This has also raised a big question over here now, of course, is who is going to replace Emma Hayes? And there has, of course, been talk of Casey Stoney. Her name has been floated, and obviously she's currently in charge of San Diego Wave. Do you think there's much in that rumor?
Well, look, I think it's a legitimate shout in that she's a spectacular coach. We've seen it up front, up close here with San Diego. Immediately, obviously they lost over the weekend in the semifinal, and they, they're still sort of figuring out how to be an elite playoff team, I guess. And maybe, playoffs are still a new thing to the franchise, to her even in the format. But over the course of a full season, both years that they've existed as an expansion team last year, San Diego's played the most consistent, identifiable brand of football for the most part. So, that's a huge credit to Casey Stoney. I think it's legitimate to be bringing her name up for a big job like Chelsea. I do think the personal side of that, which everybody has, I think we always forget, like, we're talking about humans, right? So she just had a long process to try to get her family to California, right? And she's been talking about it's finally happening, the visas, finding a house. Is that a total non-starter to take a huge job that might not come along again? Maybe not, but, there's a huge emotional toll to that, and then to suddenly reverse it, I think that could be the biggest factor of all. Yes, maybe you say, okay, I think the experience is there anyway, right? You saw what she did at Manchester United. You see what she's doing in San Diego. So I think, if anything, that's probably the biggest factor is, what does that look like personally? But I think she's a very legitimate shout and should be in the conversation.
It has been amazing speaking to the man of the hour, Jeff Kassouf, on what's happening with the US and Emma Hayes. Rach, from your perspective, do you think this seismic news is going to impact Chelsea? Do we think, actually, they've been on flying form for the start of the season? They're obviously stepping into their Champions League fixtures next week and just playing a tiny team, Real Madrid, whatever. Do we think this is going to unsettle them?
I'd like to think that they'd use it as a further catalyst for their season to say, the one trophy missing from the cabinet for Emma Hayes is the Champions League.
Let's do this for her.
Let's do it for her. I just think, it's going to give them fire in their belly. I know it would have been a big shock to them. I think they would have found out around the same time we probably did, or obviously earlier, but not too much earlier. I think it was a very well guarded secret. So yeah, I think there'll be a little bit of probably reflection, but also equally saying, right, this is what we want. We want her to go out on a high. We want to win everything this season. And it'll be a real kind of stamp on her legacy. I mean, she's already leaving a legacy. It's not like that's needed for her to leave a legacy, but I think it actually will just add more fire.
Okay, so you think actually Chelsea are going to step it up a gear rather than kind of... I think it's going to be unsettling when you've had someone at the helm for that period of time who's seen the growth and development of some of those players who have also been there for a number of years. I mean, there is a kind of family feel, like the relationships he has with someone like Lauren James, for example. I think that could be a little bit unsettling because they have quite a close relationship, and I think Lauren James is one of those players who's probably needed a bit more of a kind of like hand on the shoulder type vibe, especially going through the injuries and things, and what happened at the World Cup and stuff. So I do think a lot of it is going to depend on who then takes over the helm and how quickly that news is sort of brought out by Chelsea, or how quickly they find someone. Because I think you need that sense of, okay, Emma Hayes is leaving, but also we've got this incredible candidate, and it sort of steadies the ship a bit. So I think in a way, I think it depends on Chelsea's next steps. But
yeah, I think it's going to take them a while to find a replacement as well. And I think it's important that they have her until the end of the season, because it allows them time to find a suitable alternative and potentially have Emma Hayes help them find someone. I'd say she'll play a big part in it as well. Mm-hmm. But I also think it's equally important for her to be able to have a long goodbye. I think we've seen that from Chelsea in the past with players as well, because that's not something you get a lot of the time in football, particularly as managers. They're sacked or they go at the end of a season. So to actually be able to allow fans and her to enjoy the rest of the season, I think is really important as well.
I mean, the gravity of the news, the gravity of what this means for Chelsea, I mean, how do we think they're actually going to replace her? I mean, at the end of last season, we were sort of tipping Carla Ward maybe as the heir to Emma Hayes' throne. Do we still see that's
were we
happening? I mean,
I don't know. I think, look, I'm not sure she's necessarily the immediate replacement. Like,
especially given how the season's
gone.
Well,
true, but depending on how Carla Ward gets on the season, should she no longer be at Aston Villa, I wouldn't be surprised to find her going to Chelsea as some sort of assistant coach. But I think Chelsea will want to get in another winner. I think that's going to be important for them. So if it's a bit like when international teams or federations are looking for a new coach. It's like it says a lot about your belief in the team when you bring in someone big. And I think they're going to be looking for someone big because they are bloody big shoes to fill.
What about Joe
Montemurro? That'll be funny coming from
He's
Arsenal
won stuff, I've heard. Feels like it doesn't feel like a bad fit.
He was on the shortlist for the USA job and she usurped him. So, potentially there's big names out there. There's international coaches out there as well who maybe want to make the move back into domestic football. But I don't know. I'm sure we'll start to hear names floating about as time goes on. I think maybe it's a bit too soon to know who they're going to be looking at.
I mean, we've obviously been talking about how negative the impact is probably potentially going to be for Chelsea. But we've got an amazing question here from Lovable Scamp on Instagram. Could Hayes leaving actually be really good for the WSL as a whole by reducing Chelsea's dominance? I mean, we just had a brief discussion about this before. We were kind of saying, okay, you've got to put it into the context of, the WSL is now one of the most competitive leagues in the world. But you can't get away from the fact that Chelsea have been completely dominating domestic football for quite a long time now. When you sort of look at, the league title itself, they've either been first or second in the WSL since 2014. The FA Cup, in the past 10 years, they've either been runners or winners of the FA Cup. The Conti Cup, they've either won or come second in the last 4 years. I mean, their presence at the top is huge. So first of all, it's kind of, do we think the impact of Hayes leaving is going to affect Chelsea so much that they start to dip in form? And two, do we think that actually if they do start to do that, it opens up the doors for other people to start taking some silverware?
I don't know. I don't really like that. It kind of almost implies that like everyone else is shit.
Nice.
And I think, had she stayed, the league just continued to be getting more and more competitive. Arguably we can't say that Chelsea are going to win every trophy this season because you just don't know. It's getting tighter and closer and harder to call. I think what she's done at Chelsea has forced a lot of teams to buck up their ideas and to invest more. I think in order to keep up with and compete with, it has forced other clubs. Not that other clubs aren't investing. You see, there are other clubs with really impressive plans and investment behind the women's teams, but it's put the pressure on, and I think that pressure will maintain. It's not like these clubs are investing just because they want to beat Chelsea. Like, she's raised the bar, but these clubs want to maintain and push the bar because they want their teams to be good, not just because of Chelsea, if you know what I mean. I'm not going to say that it would necessarily be really good for the WSL as a whole. I think her impact has been huge for the WSL as a whole. But I think the league will continue to flourish without her. But I think she's played a huge part in getting it to that point.
Comprehensive.
Thank you.